Sports in this June 22nd, 2023 episode. We got a lot going on right now. I'm going to put it to you plain and simple. We're hopping on here 7 o'clock. We're in the middle, bottom of the fourth, LSU versus Wake Forest. LSU forced the elimination game today. We got Paul Skeens, Rhett Lauder going right now, bottom of the fourth. 0-0 as you can probably expect. It's the best pitcher matchup we've had all year in college baseball. If I were you, I have us on your computer and I have that game on TV. If you're a smart person out there, you're not missing this episode, but you're also not missing the college baseball game of the year. I'll keep you updated on that. They're waiting. The winner of that is waiting on that berth for in the championship series that will start on Saturday against Florida. It's the Florida Gators. Florida's sitting at home right now, resting up. They also got some good news on the recruiting front as well. I'll talk about that in just a minute as well. But I will keep you up to date what is going on in Omaha. In Omaha right now, we're bottom of the fourth. LSU knotted at 0. Paul Skeens, Rhett Lauder, pitching jams. Are you surprised? This guy's not. Also, NBA draft literally just started down over in Brooklyn. We got 5 projected SEC players going in the first round. We got Brandon Miller, probably projected going back and forth between him and Scoot Henderson at 2 or 3. I think he probably ends up at 3 in Portland. Anthony Black, we all remember, big, long, great defender, point guard from Arkansas. He's probably projected to go to Orlando, give some bigger size that guard that backcourt for the Magic. Then also going in the first round, we got Cason Wallace from Kentucky, Noah Clowney from Alabama, and Nick Smith Jr. all projected in the top 20 or just outside it. So it should be, from a first round standpoint, a big night if you're an Alabama basketball fan or an Arkansas basketball fan. And I think it's probably the biggest rivalry in the SEC right now. So both those programs really going to put a notch on their belt from a recruiting standpoint, most likely going to get 2 players each from Alabama and Arkansas going in the first round. Guys after that, second round guys, guys like G.G. Jackson, I would say, from South Carolina, Jordan Walsh, another Arkansas kid, Julian Phillips from Tennessee, Chris Livingston from Kentucky, Kobe Brown from Missouri, and where does Oscar Tshiebwe go? Where's the Naismith winner from 2 years ago go? Does he fall out? I don't know. I'll keep you updated. It just started, so I got a lot going on in this episode. I got to keep you up with what's going on in Omaha. Best pitching matchup, best college baseball game of the season. Winner goes and has the right to face Florida starting on Saturday in the championship series. We got NBA draft. 2023 NBA draft. 5 projected SEC guys going in the first round. SEC basketball. I'm telling you. Also in the docket, I told you better have us on. You better have us on the computer right now. And you better have that baseball game on. And if you can do the split screen, go to the NBA draft. Or you can just get it from us. But also, we're going to do a little scout school. I'm going to introduce that series, Scout School, term thrown around in the personnel family a lot. I know Jim Nagy over at the Senior Bowl does a good job over there. I used to do it for my students at Kansas and Texas A&M as well. So just kind of doing a little scout school. We'll be going through the month of June through July. Hopefully, if everybody likes it, we're going to have my friend Josh Murphy, former staffer at the University of Georgia, former staffer at the University of Washington, worked for Mark Richt, Kirby Smart, Chris Peterson, has a lot of good intel. He will join the show. He's going to help us break down some guys. You may ask, what film are we going to be breaking down, Dave? What film? That's a good question. Like I said, every Thursday, just Thursday. Don't get excited Tuesday. After this one, I think you're going to be real excited. So you're going to want it maybe every Tuesday and Thursday. But right now, we're going to start Thursday through July. We're going to go take you to yesteryear. Probably not go back any further in 2013, 2014. But some of your favorite players from your favorite SEC teams, go break down their high school film. For example, we're breaking down 3 guys today. This isn't going to be one of them, but Joe Burrow. We're going to break down guys like Joe Burrow from Athens High School in Ohio. We're going to go back and watch that high school film. Just talk about what we remember from that recruitment. Just show you what they look like just from an elite specimen. The defensive lineman we're going to be watching today is one of my favorite players, probably the best film I've seen from a high school standpoint. I think Josh would agree with me. But we'll get to that in just a minute as well. Then I'll have a little unit position breakdown here. It's a little put up or shut up SEC West edition. It's a position of unit that needs to kind of take that next step. Not necessarily the biggest weakness of that team heading into the season, but really just kind of a team that may have to shoulder a little bit more weight on their team this year. It's, again, not the weakness, but it's going to be, hey, we've recruited well there. We've got guys 2 or 3 years into the system. We need to kind of take that next step if we're going to go achieve what we really want to achieve through this season, heading into the 23 season. We will get to that in just a minute. So like I said, we'll keep you up with Omaha. We're going to keep you up with the draft. But as you know, we always start the show with some transfer portal news. Starting off, I didn't really want to get into baseball transfer portal news till after baseball season in college. But real quick, Alabama's All-American third baseman, freshman All-American, Colby Shelton, entered the portal a couple of days ago. He is now he committed to Florida. So great day for Kevin O'Sullivan. Guy's probably sitting in his bed, resting up, scouting to see if he's going to play Wake Forest or LSU. He also gets a freshman All-American in Colby Shelton, who led Alabama in home runs. An Alabama team that went to a super regional. Big pickup for Florida. Colby Shelton was a Florida native, so not surprising. Also, the last update from a college baseball transfer portal perspective, Alabama Friday night ace Luke Holman also entered the portal. So it's going to be a little tough sledding a little bit for Rob Bond. They're losing a lot. The new coach for Alabama, new baseball coach for Alabama, young cat. I like the hires coming over from Maryland, resurrected that program, turned them to what they are today, consistent regional team. But he's going to have his work cut out for him this year. I mean, just lost his ace pitcher. Alton Davis, the closer, announced he was coming back, but losing Colby Shelton is probably one of his first things to do on a priority list. Not going to keep him. He's going to go play for the Gators back in the home state. So a good time to be a Florida Gator baseball fan right now. You're stealing from some other good SEC baseball programs, and you're sitting and waiting to see who's going to be your opponent in the National Championship Series on Saturday, LSU or Wake Forest. But like I said, we're going to move right to basketball. And is it crazy we're talking about college basketball offseason roster additions June 22nd? That's nuts. I think the basketball offseason is one of the funnest things now. I think it's one of the funnest off seasons to really keep up with. But Kentucky received some good positive news. Antonio Reeves will be coming back for Kentucky right now. That's great. That's big time. They needed some senior or some upperclassmen to help with that young roster coming in. I mean, they only had 7 scholarship guys as like 2 weeks ago. I think there were 5 true freshmen. Remember, they signed the number 1 recruiting class in the country. 5 true freshmen, 2 sophomores. They signed another kid. They flipped from UCF the other day, Joey Hart. And then Antonio Reeves was massive. Reeves was massive. Solid get. But for Kentucky, he's just a guy. I mean, is that where we're at from a Kentucky standard right now? Is that where we're at right now? We're celebrating Antonio Reeves. He's okay. I mean, he's a 39% three-point shooter last year, which is solid. Gives them a shooter. But again, how many shots is he going to get off when you got guys, the number 1 freshman class in America coming in between Justin Edwards and DJ Wagner specifically? I mean, Aaron Bradshaw's out. He's a big guy. He's not going to take away many shots, I don't think, from Antonio Reeves. But still, I mean, where are all those shots going to come from? It's an interesting little dynamic. A young roster, 1 older guy. I don't know. This is what we're celebrating, is Antonio Reeves coming back to Kentucky. I mean, he entered the NBA draft, took his name out, said he was taking his name out of the NBA draft. He's going back to school, but he didn't say what school. Looks like he went back to Illinois State, where he transferred from before heading to Lexington last year to finish up some classes. Now he's back to Kentucky, and we're acting like it's a big deal. I know I said massive earlier, and it is for Kentucky's specific roster this year, but in the grand scheme of things, it's the University of Kentucky. It's Big Blue Nation. I mean, we should be celebrating them getting Arthur Kaluma instead of K-State beating them out for him. Now, I think it may be a better role for him over there, but if Kentucky really wants a kid, they should get him, which leads me to John Calipari. He's failed this offseason. You've heard it. He has failed this offseason. I always support Cal, but if you really, when he got hired back in 2010, I would expect it a little more by now. And I feel like I'm one of the last guys to get off that. I'm not really off the bandwagon yet, but like, you did sign a really talented freshman class. Again, keep naming them. Aaron Bradshaw, DJ Wagner. We got Justin Edwards. They're going to be talented. But how do you not enter the portal at all? And you're going to be like, well, Dave, he is trying to get in the portal. He just created the quote-unquote collective La Familia, a new he's not calling it a collective, Cal. He's not into the collective. But what this is it's a collective out of the boosters that are in Cal's corner. Cal wants control now. Don't underestimate that. A little bit like Nick Saban. He wants full control. He doesn't want collectives or donors at Kentucky, the ones he doesn't get along with, to donate money and tell him who's going to play. He's going to go pick the donors, boosters he wants to donate money to his La Familia collective. And he's going to use that money as he wants, or tells those guys that trust Cal. They're Cal guys. He doesn't want guys stirring his drink that don't trust him, or he thinks going to go behind his back, or maybe stand up and say, hey, let's get rid of Cal in the next year or two. He doesn't want that. He wants guys he trusts. So he created his own little collective. Now, you're not going to hear him when SEC Basketball Media Days comes up. He's not going to say it's a collective. He's still going to say he doesn't mess with collectives. He's never messed with boosters. But I mean, if you go watch the 30 for 30 on Cal, he used to deal with the guy who was around the Memphis program all the time, Worldwide West. He used to deal with him all the time. So Cal just contradicts himself a little bit. He's a control freak. He's created his own collective, with the boosters that are close to him donating that money so they don't have to tell him what's going on because they trust Cal. That's what it is. That's what's going on. But he's so far behind times. We're in the Stone Age. He messed up this roster. Kentucky's, they're going to be talented 1 through 7. They're just not going to have a big roster, no veteran leadership, and youth doesn't win now. It doesn't. It doesn't. And Cal needs to at least go to the Sweet 16 Elite 8 next year. I just don't see that happening right now. I mean, Aaron Bradshaw's already going to be out for 4 to 6 months. That's going to limit his development. Not big on – I just think he ultimately failed this offseason. Nothing against him. He's won a national championship. Just a little bit of underachievement. A little Jimbo Fisher. They're very tomato. Both have won national championship. It's been a long time. Both around the same time. Cal won his in 2012. Jimbo won his in 2013. Both of them a little bit overpaid. I mean, Kentucky hadn't made it past the second round of the Sweet 16 second round of the tournament since 2019. Well, it's 6 years. It's been a long time. Don't quote me on that. Something around that. Don't feel like looking it up right now because we're in the middle of the show. But Cal messed up this year. It's a little too late. You got to be in the collective Davies time. You can't put your nose in the air. You had plenty of time. They should have went and got Hunter Dickinson or Arthur Kaluma. Kentucky should never lose a kid to Kansas State. Should never happen. They're going to be young. They're going to be talented. But I don't know if they get to the expectations that Big Blue Nation has for Kentucky and Cal next year. I'll leave it at that. Moving over, Alabama gets a big commitment from stretch forward Jaron Stevenson. They got him over North Carolina. This was a North Carolina kid from Seaforth High School. Mom played basketball, I believe, at North Carolina. He was a 2024 kid. I think he was ranked 45th in the country in the on-3 2024 basketball rankings. He reclassified. So he's going to help Alabama add some front court depth. I still think they got some issues a little bit on that front court. But if they can get Grant Nelson in, I don't think they're really going to be lacking on stature. I think they'll have 5+ dudes, 6'8" or taller. They're going to loop. They may get bullied a little bit down low, but again, Alabama has 4 to 5 months to figure this out. It's not like they lost Charles Bediako in the middle of the season and they have to adjust their whole defensive scheme. They have a while to figure out their own mismatches from a smaller lineup that they can give fits to other teams. But guys like Tolu Smith from Mississippi State, Janai Broom from Auburn could cause some problems for Alabama, like a little bit like they did last year. It wasn't surprising either. Or that wasn't unheard of for Alabama either. But again, big roster pickup for Alabama. If they can add Grant Nelson, you really like where the Tide sits. I mean, everybody, I said it on Twitter yesterday, Nate Oates was left for dead after the Sweet 16 loss, and then he lost his 3 assistants, Brian Hutchins, Antoine Petway, and Charlie Henry, all to head coaching jobs. And then he had to manage the portal. Wasn't expecting Noah Clowney to leave probably going into the year. Nobody did. Towards the end of the year, he probably suspected, but you knew we were going to lose Brandon Miller, lost Noah Clowney, surprisingly. Charles Bediako, 11th hour, decides he's going to stay in the draft, and I don't think he's going to end up in the second round. He should have came back, but look at this. Hired really good assistants, got an assistant coach from the Pelicans, probably going to hire his Nickel State's head coach to come be an assistant. That's big time. And then you have Austin Conch is his name from Nickel State. And then I think you're going to get Preston Murphy, a guy that has a show calls right now to come be your big-time recruiter. I think his show calls in today, actually, now that I'm bringing it up. June 22nd. He's a Creighton guy. I think that's the writing's on the wall. That'll be the third assistant for Alabama, I think, in Nate Oates' staff. But Nate Oates, I mean, you could argue Alabama's had the best offseason of anybody in the SEC from a basketball standpoint. And it looked bleak in March and April. But you got to give it time. I think people are adjusting to this portal, how everything's. College basketball rosters extend later now. Guys missed the June semester. Like Jaron Stevenson's not rolling in Tuscaloosa until the July semester, the second summer semester. Probably Grant Nelson as well once he gets his academic stuff in order. But again, basketball rosters are going to take its time. You want to be like Kentucky and not fill out any rosters. I think they're going to struggle from a depth and youth standpoint next year. But you got to give Nate Oates credit. Hired 2 quality assistants. They need to come get that recruiter. I think it's for Preston Murphy's going to come. But man, they really did well in the portal at the end. Especially if you had Grant Nelson, you get Jaron Stevenson. You don't feel great about your front court, but you feel a lot better. Also, heading over, transitioning to the next segment. That was our basketball portal, little baseball portal segment before we get Josh to join on the show. Josh should be on probably the next 15 minutes, 7:30. It's put up or shut up time in the SEC West. I explained it a little bit on the front end of the show. This is kind of the position unit for the teams in the SEC West. And when I say units, you're going to see, because I'm going to have some skill outside guys, and I'm grouping the secondary as one instead of just corners and safeties. I'm grouping that as one. Just kind of the units that need to take a step up this year, take their game to the next level. Not necessarily the biggest weakness on that team, but kind of like, hey, we may be weaker. We need you guys to step up. We've recruited really well here for 2 years. The guys have been 2 years in this system with this specific position coach, with this coordinator, with our strength coach for 3 years for 3 years straight. It's time to take the next step. We need you to take it to that next level for us to accomplish our goals this year. So let's lead off. The Alabama Crimson Tide. We're going in alphabetical order. I think it's receivers. Some will blame Bill O'Brien, and some of that's true from the schematic standpoint. But on short passes, hear me out on this stat. Short passes thrown less than 10 yards in the air. Alabama receiver yards after the catch was down nearly half from 3 years ago, from 10.13 in 2019 to 5.44 in 2002. This is per True Media. Let me repeat that. Alabama's receiver yards after the catch on short passes thrown than 10 yards in the air. Alabama wide receivers after the catch was down nearly half from 19 to 22. Just lacking explosive plays is what that means. I can break down that formula, that problem for you. That's lack of explosive plays. It's lack of explosive plays. I think a little bit with the Tide. The leading pass catcher last year was a little bit behind the system. Is Jahmyr Gibbs running back out of the backfield, giving him space? It's not smart. I mean, it's not dumb. But for a little bit, it was true freshman Kobe Prentice, who was a true receiver at Ledham. And then finally, Jermaine Burton ended up leading them in receptions last year, and Ja'Cory Brooks is right after. But those are guys that have been in the pro. Well, Jermaine Burton's been in college for 3 or 4 years now. Ja'Cory Brooks needs to hit the next step. I mean, you remember him from the big catch from Bryce Young in the 2021 Iron Bowl. But those guys, the older guys, need to take the next step, especially when you got a quarterback transition. It could be Tyler Buckner. It could be Ty Simpson. It could be Jalen Milroe. You need to help them out. You need to help them out. It's just you never feel like last year any of the guys, the older guys, took that next step. I mean, in the years, you started seeing some of these younger guys start flashing. But they also have a guy like Malik Benson, the number 1 junior college receiver in the country at Hutchinson Community College in Kansas. He's on the roster. Heard big things about him in the spring. But it's a big year for this unit. It's a big year. I think a lot of it's just because of the expectations of guys Alabama's had in the past with Jalen Waddle, Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith, guys like Henry Ruggs, guys like that. Alabama fans are used to seeing that. You hadn't seen that really the last 2 years. You had J-Mo, you had Jamison Williams, you had John Mechie, but John Mechie shouldn't be your number 1. I love John Mechie. I think he was a great player, great role. He's not a number 1 receiver. So I really think the last 2 years they've been struggling. This is it. This is a big year for wide receiver coach Holman Wiggins. It's a big year for Holman Wiggins. Big year. He's got to develop these guys because he's got a good young core base. I like the young cats. I mean, like you said, you got Kobe Prentice. Who are my other guys? You got Kobe Prentice, pulling up the depth chart for you right here. Sorry, the name slipped my head real fast. I mean, I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, all right. We got Isaiah Bond, Kendrick Law, and Kobe Prentice. Those are guys I'm talking about, and you could have a guy like Emmanuel Henderson step up as well. Those are kind of the guys that need to step up for Alabama to exceed expectations on offense. Now, you could throw in a little bit some more outside help with guys like Robbie Oots, some tight ends, guys like that, the Maryland transfer, Dupreen over there. That could be big as well. So that's it for Alabama right now. Moving on, the Arkansas Razorbacks. It's put up or shut up time for the Razorbacks. I think it's the secondary. I think anybody listening to this show could have easily guessed that. It's the secondary. As poor as Arkansas was on defense last year, how surprised would you be if I told you they had a record-setting year in sacks? 42 sacks to be exact. A lot of that was Drew Sanders. He's gone. But you think that would help the secondary, and it still didn't. It still didn't. As they finished last in yards per game in the SEC and gave up over 30 points per game, the Razorbacks. Not good. That was not good. The pass rush should be fine. The transfer Trahan Jeffcoat from Missouri should come help. If Landon Jackson can take that next level, takes that next step, that would be big as well. Also, I mean, outside of Dwight McGlothern, I don't really trust anyone in this secondary. Hudson Clark is what he is. He's a guy. He gets picked on. I mean, last year, Arkansas allowed opponents to convert 45% of their third down conversions. And even 5 opponents converted 50% or more last year. That's bad. That's bad. Throw in, you got a new DC and a co-DC. You got new DC Travis Williams, and you got co-DC Marcus Woodson coming over from Florida State. Travis Williams coming over for UCF. I've worked with him. They'll play with an edge this year. I'll say that. Arkansas will play with an edge this year. Those inside linebackers, Pooh, and then will be really good next year. I kind of like the linebackers here. Secondary concerns me, though. That's where Marcus Woodson's going to have to come in. But, again, that's on the secondary, giving up that many third down conversions. Guys have to start making plays, and injuries can no longer be an excuse. It's time for the Razorbacks to put up or shut up. Moving to Auburn, moving to the Plains. It's the wide receivers. It's tough for a first-year staff to say put up or shut up. But I think for this specific year, it's definitely the wide receivers you make. Well, Dave, what about one of the quarterbacks, Robbie Ashford or Peyton Thorne? I think with Hugh Freeze's system, he's always developed quarterbacks. And with some of the weapons they brought in the receivers and Hugh Freeze's scheme, this is really going to help some. This is really going to help some of these wide receivers get open in their scheme. Now, I'm not saying any of these guys are like DK Metcalf, but overall, who is the best Auburn receiver of all time? Who's the best Auburn receiver, even in NFL perspective? Auburn hasn't really ever produced receivers. I think that's going to change over time with Hugh Freeze. But like I said, with Hugh Freeze on the Plains, you adding guys like Jair Shorter, Shane Hooks from Jackson State, and Nick Martyr from Cincinnati, and Shorter, I should have said already, he's from North Texas transfer. Auburn's loaded up. I don't think you got any guys that Hugh Freeze is used to seeing, like A.J. Brown or DK Metcalf or Laquan Treadwell. I don't think you have that. But just baby steps, and if this group by the middle of the year can just as a unit be solid and get something out of paper, I think this could be a really good team. I think this could be a really, really, really good team for Auburn, especially on offense. I mean, again, when's the last time Hugh Freeze has not had an offense? It's a little bit like Lane Kiffin. It's a little bit like Lane Kiffin to me. He's just not going to put up bad offensive numbers, and I don't think that's going to change. And I think the way we look at Auburn receivers is going to change with Hugh Freeze because he's always had good receivers. But like I said, between these portal additions of those 3 or 4 receivers he's brought in Hugh Freeze's system, it's time for Auburn to put up or shut up that wide receiver position. I hate to say that in the first year, but for Auburn to go win 8-9 games like I think they'd like to in that first year, some receivers are going to step up by middle of the year. Maybe not the beginning, but by the middle of the year, Auburn receivers, it's time to put up or shut up. LSU, head down to the Bayou. Defensive line, in my opinion. The defensive line, people may challenge this and say, what about the secondary? DBU, they're losing that. They lost Corey Raymond. They haven't been the same in the secondary since they lost C-Ray. But LSU is its true self. It doesn't have a Joe Burrow-led, fantastic all-time season Heisman Trophy winner. I mean, think about that. You think of LSU football at heart. It's great. They'll take that every year. I mean, I would take Joe Burrow. He's my favorite quarterback in the NFL right now. You would take Joe Burrow every year, twice on Sunday. But what LSU is really known for is their nasty, violent defensive line. Guys like Gwen Dorsey, Tyson Jackson, Barkevious Mingo, Sam Montgomery. Guys like that you're used to seeing and hearing down in Baton Rouge. LSU has won predominantly their championship seasons with dominant play up front. That's on offense too. I think this year for LSU, just getting off topic a little bit, it's going to come down to trench play on both sides of the line of scrimmage. Running the football, stopping the run. That's going to be it for LSU. The secondary, you can talk about it all you want. If LSU generates a bit better of a pass rush, if guys like Savion Jones can get to the quarterback, that's going to help the secondary in the back end. I mean, it is. Mason Smith, he needs to step up. Coming off an ACL tear. I know last year it's out of the window. It's almost a full year of recovery. He's going to have to step up this year if LSU wants to take that next step as a defensive line unit. Savion Jones, I just mentioned his name. He's another guy that's going to have to be productive. Jacobian Guillory, another guy in the interior. If they want to stop the run, I think LSU's going to be fine with their linebackers. I think they're going to be fine at inside linebacker. It's going to be those front 4 guys that are going to set the tone physically and help possess the pass rush. That's what's going to happen. The run defense was very average at times. Front 7 didn't get to the quarterback enough. I mean, they had under 30 sacks for the year. That's got to improve. I'm sure Matt House will fix that. Like I said, the secondary has issues, but that front 4 specifically, can really help these guys by affecting the quarterback. Maybe not even sacking it, but like Nick Saban says, it's not about sacking the quarterback. It's affecting the quarterback. It can lead to turnovers. I'm telling you, if LSU's front 4 can be a dominant run force, not even dominant, good at stopping the run and creating a pass rush, that secondary is going to look a whole lot better. It's time for LSU's defensive line to put up or shut up. Ole Miss's secondary. That's next. We're heading to Oxford. We're heading to the patch. Ole Miss's secondary. You're hearing secondary a lot. But look, I'm not an unrealistic guy. And I'm fully aware who the head coach at the University of Mississippi is. That is Lane Kiffin. He's naturally an offensive guy. He takes a lot of risk, goes for it on fourth down. It's no surprise to anybody. So he's going to put his defense in some rough spots at times. He just is. He's going to put his defense in rough spots. And if you're Pete Golden, you took the job knowing that. I mean, if you've been living under a rock, I don't know how you'd have missed it, but Pete Golden, the former Alabama DC, is now in Oxford. He's in Oxford, Mississippi. So he knew what he got into. The defensive numbers aren't going to look as pretty, but if you just understand and anticipate and you adjust the defense to marry his offense to something, I'm talking about Mary Kiffin's offense, and have a successful defense. So I say all this to know that the Rebels are going to be thin in the secondary. I mean, you don't lose guys in a very average group already, like A.J. Finley, Tysheem Johnson, the transfer portal, and Davison Igbinosun, who transferred to Ohio State. You don't lose those guys. Not have some kind of a drop-off, but it's not a secondary littered with playmakers either. The replacements behind them, they have some pieces, Asheem Young, Trey Washington, I'm looking here, and it feels like DeAndre Prince has been at Ole Miss forever. He transferred, came back. But the key will be generating more than 8 turnovers than they had last year. Look, Pete Golden's not a dumb guy. He knows he's coaching a defense for a predominantly offensive coach that's going to go put his defense in rough situations at times. It doesn't care. Not that he doesn't care that, hey, I'm putting my defense in rough situations that are going to fail. It's just he's aggressive. Lane Kiffin's aggressive. Pete Golden knew that taking this job. So I think he's got to get a little bit more creative in creating turnovers, having some simulated blitz packages, bringing guys from different levels. Your secondary is just not going to lock guys down. You're just not that good personnel-wise up there. So you're going to have to adjust that, but a lot of that's going to hinge on the secondary. I think the defensive line could generate some guys. The second level linebacker is just okay with guys like Austin Keys, but it's going to come down to the secondary making plays, being some ball hawks, give up some yards between the 20s. But Ole Miss has to be better on third down and create more than 8 turnovers. So it's either put up or shut up time for the Ole Miss secondary. Moving over across the state to Starkville, Mississippi. This is another unit. I just used Ole Miss's secondary. I told you before this segment, I'm not just doing specific positions. I'm kind of putting it in a unit for some of these guys. So the secondary for Ole Miss, same goes for Mississippi State here. This is a unit. Some outside threats. I'm incorporating the wide receivers and tight ends on this one as well. Look, it's a new staff in Starkville with first-time head coach Zach Arnett. Defense is going to be fine. He promoted Mac Brock, and they got a lot of guys back on defense. They should be fine. They're going to be used to that terminology with Zach Barnett and Brock. But new OC, Kevin Barbie, coming over from Appalachian State, bringing a new offensive system. They got 4 starters back on the offensive line. Will Rogers is back, new system. He's been in a spread offense since his Brandon high school days. Could be a little bit of adjustment, but I'm not really worried about Will Rogers. I'm really not. It's going to be about the wide receivers and tight ends. And yes, Mississippi State fans, you heard me right. I said the position tight end. They may have had to go build a position room there because under Mike Leach, God rest his soul, they didn't use the tight end. Probably didn't have a position group. They maybe it turned it into a break room or a game room, the old tight end room under Dan Mullen. But now they had to go renovate that because they're going to be using tight ends a lot with Kevin Barbie. And they brought 2 good ones in, 2 transfers, Rylan Goday from Georgia. That doesn't mean you're a bad player. You're transferring out of Georgia's tight end room with Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington sitting there. Also, they brought in Jorkavia Spivey from TCU. They're going to have options there. Mississippi State fans are going to have to get used to the tight end being thrown to. May have to remind them what the position is. I'm just kidding, Mississippi State fans. I know you know what a tight end is. Dan Mullen use them at times. But the guys on the outside, again, Rylan Goday, Jorkavia Spivey, guys like Rufus Harvey, Justin Robinson, Jaden Wally, they're going to step up. I mean, State lost a lot on the outside. You just don't really replace Ra Thomas, who transferred to Georgia. Caleb Ducking was a sure-handed guy. Same with Austin Williams. You lose all 3 of those guys. So those guys like Rufus Harvey, Justin Robinson, and Jalen Wally are going to have to step up along with the tight ends. I think there's enough weapons there for Mississippi State to be effective, especially with Will Rogers. I think he's a smart kid. He's going to adjust to that well. But one of these position groups, tight ends or receivers on the outside, are going to have to step up if this first season for Zach Arnett and Mississippi State Bulldogs want to go as they want it to. And I think that's a 6, 7, maybe 8-win season. I think their top 4 hardest games are all at home. There's opportunities there. I'm a little excited for what Barbie and that App State offense is coming over to show that App State offense is going to do in Starkville. But Mississippi State's wide receivers and tight ends, your offense, your outside threats. It's put up or shut up time, guys. Got to get it done. And then finally, the last team in the SEC West, the Texas A&M Fighting Aggies. It's the offensive line unit. Steve Adazio and the boys. Steve Adazio, the offensive line coach. You remember him, his days at Boston College. Just guys being dudes. If you don't know that reference, go YouTube him. It's a funny clip, him sitting on the top of the Boston College Stadium, just looking out on a practice field. Just being, man, guys being dudes. Funny clip, go look at it. Also, Steve Adazio, you remember him. He's from Temple. He used to be the offensive line tight ends coach at Florida with Urban Meyer. But yes, it's his group. They're one of 8 teams that have all 5 starters back on the offensive line. Maybe 4, depending on how you categorize Cam Dewberry at left guard last year. But they got 5 starters back, I'm considering. Now, returning production is one of the more overrated stats, I think, in college football. If you have bad players coming back, is that a good thing? A lot of stats are overrated, but I think that's one of them as well. But that's not the case here. A&M has some talent. Reuben Fothery out there at the tackle position. Trey Zune. Layden Robinson's a guy that's played a lot of football. And last year wasn't good, and there's no need to get in the stats. I'm not going to bring it up and other stuff. But to be fair, there was a good amount of injuries. The quarterback position was always up in the air until Connor Weidman took it over at the end of the year. But now it's time to step up if you're at Texas A&M offensive line. You've recruited solid a little bit. I think the way it's been evaluated, Jimbo, with a lot of turnover at that offensive line position, is an offensive line coach position between Jim Turner starting out there. Who else they had? They had Josh was the USC offensive line coach now, and then they have Steve Adazio now. I mean, he's had a lot. I don't really think there's a prototype there. They took size and limited some of their athleticism in taking some of these guys. They took a lot of big guys that weren't very athletic, and I think that's showing. But some of that talent's there, and enough of these guys have played in college football. Remember, 5 starters back, in my opinion. One of 8 schools to do that. It's time to be the bell cow and step up on this offensive line. They got to take a chip on their shoulder. This unit's got to start showing up in the offseason. It's got to start showing up in the offseason with a strength and conditioning coach. This offensive line unit's going to be really key for the Aggie success this year, and if Jimbo Fisher retains his job at the end of the year. Point blank. That's what it's going to come down to. And if this marriage with Bobby Petrino is going to work, it doesn't matter what they do scheme-wise outside. They run a bunch of Seattle routes, now screens, whatever. It doesn't matter if the offensive line's not protecting Connor Weidman, or they're establishing the line of scrimmage so they can get in simple throws and make Connor Weidman's life a lot easier. It's going to come down to this offensive line. So Texas A&M's offensive line, it's time to put up or shut up. Appreciate you taking the time. I hope you enjoyed that. On Tuesday, we'll go over the SEC East. Put up or shut up. I'll go by position/unit. I hope you like that. I'll put some of those clips out on social media. But it's time. It's time to bring Josh Murphy in. Let me get him in here. Let me copy that link. Let me email it over to him. He will be joining the show in just a moment. But while we're waiting, let's see what's happening down in Omaha. I'm gonna pull that up for you. We're waiting on Josh to come in and do our new Scout School segment that's gonna go through July. Remember, I think it's gonna be a really fun segment for everybody. I think you're really gonna enjoy it. It's gonna take you some nostalgia. Checking the score. We got a 0-0 game, top of the 7th. Well, man, we still got Rhett Lauder, and we got Paul Skeens still just dealing. Top of the 7th, 0-0. Wake Forest is batting right now, 2-2 count. So I'll keep you updated on that. Let's go from an NBA draft standpoint, what we're looking like for Josh. All right, no surprise here. Victor Wembanyama, Wemby. He went number 1 to San Antonio Spurs. Brandon Miller, Michael Jordan, the GOAT, decided to go with Brandon Miller, the Hornets. I mean, Charlotte's an Alabama town now. You got Bryce Young with Carolina. You got Brandon Miller with the Hornets. It is an Alabama town now. Portland took Scoot Henderson. Remember, it was up for debate, the 2 and 3 spots. And then the Rockets have Amen Thompson. The next guy from the SEC should be Anthony Black. I'm expecting top 10 from Anthony Black here. That's the update from the NBA draft. Let me see where Josh is. Get him on here. Yeah, so right now we got a lot going on. This is going to be fun. It's going to be real fun when we get him on here in just a moment. I should be able to pop up. Sorry about that. I'm trying to get him on right now. So we'll keep waiting here. Josh should pop up in a minute. I don't know why it's not coming up, but we will get him on in a minute. This LSU baseball game is going to be over before we blink. It's going to be over before we blink. Top of the seventh, everyone was excited for this. Everybody was real excited for this matchup with LSU baseball. It's probably best college baseball game in a long time from a standpoint of a pitching matchup. I see why it is not letting him. Sorry about that. Let's see. One second. Let's see. Murph, I got you on now. I can't hear you. Murph? I can't hear you. Are you good now? Let's see. He'll rejoin. So having some audio technical difficulties. Let's see. Let's get back to the LSU baseball game real fast. Let's see. In case you're missing at home. One second. Let me try to share it with him again. Murph.
You got me?
I got you.
You got me. Hey, here I am.
Murph, welcome to the show, baby.
What's up, man? I'm sorry
got
about
you
that.
on. So 7:30, we got you on at 7:40. It's not too bad. It's not too bad. Well, hey, we do a live show. You have some technical stuff, but hey, we evolve, we adapt. But hey, Josh Murphy joining us. I told you at the top of the show, former Georgia staff, recruiting staffer, former Washington staffer. I mean, if you really want to put the head coaches he's worked under, I mean, there aren't many people who have better head coaches. Mark Richt, Kirby Smart, Chris Peterson, always been jealous. He's worked for him. But again, Josh, if you want to introduce yourself to everybody, where you're from, what's kind of your background, how you got into college football before we get in and kind of go back to the yesteryears.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Well, yeah, again, I appreciate you having me on here. It's awesome getting to see you do this and listen to you talk some ball and talk some SEC stuff. So happy to be on here, man. But yeah, I'm from Savannah, Georgia. I went to UGA where I was a sports management major, started working for Coach Rick. Like Dave said, got to work in college football for a lot of big time names, a lot of assistant coaches that went on to be, head coaches, Shane Beamer and Mel Tucker and Sam Pittman, Jeremy Pruitt. It's just how loaded, Georgia was at the time. Kirby Smart, obviously. So I spent, not to mention all the other, Thomas Brown's the OC for the Panthers now. So, I mean, just the amount of guys that were part of those staffs that went on to be elsewhere is pretty incredible. And then, like Dave said, I got hired by University of Washington the year they made the playoffs versus Alabama. So it was nice. I was in Athens, drove over to Atlanta, hopped a plane to Seattle, and I was there for a couple of years where I worked with Coach Pete and got to be a part of some good teams there, and eventually resigned in 2020 as the director of on-campus recruiting and got out of that part of recruiting completely. And then ever since, it's kind of bounced around. Obviously COVID was a little weird, but since then I've started recruiting 101, which essentially just takes everything that I learned, working for all those head coaches and working for all those schools and those different coaches, and basically just trying to take all the information that you and I learned working in recruiting, what goes into it, identification, evaluation, marketing, customer service, all of that concept. And then basically just flipping it around and reversing it and saying, hey, kids, recruits, families, this is how we find you. This is how we evaluate you. And this is how you can put yourself in the best position to succeed. So basically it's just taking the concept that we did working in recruiting departments and flipping it and giving back to kids to allow them a space to have, high level recruiting information, understand how this thing works from the kind of the highest level of football, and do so from somebody who's been in the building and really kind of understands the ins and outs of the process. And then really trying to do it in a way that it's accessible for everybody. So that's my little spiel, and that's why I'm here.
Josh, so you always kind of dream of getting into the personnel side of things? Like it was kind of your growing up, or you just kind of feel like you fell into it just being a Georgia football fan? I mean, at root of it, I always kind of hated when people, not hated, that's a strong word, always just kind of disliked a little bit in football. It's like, don't be a fan. It's like, well, we all kind of at some point got into this because you're a fan. Now, again, you can't be making decisions emotionally, and I think that is a little bit from a fan, but a little bit, we all get into it. We're a little bit of because of our childhood growing up cheering for Alabama, cheering for Georgia, whoever it may be.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I mean, I grew up a Georgia fan. We had season tickets my whole life. My dad and my mom, so their first year at Georgia was 1980. Obviously, pretty good year to be in Athens. Kind of it set a standard for the rest of my life, pretty much. My dad was at in Athens in 1980. You got Georgia and Herschel Walker, and that whole thing's going on. You got Dominique doing his thing on basketball. You got B-52s, and you got REM doing their deal on the music scene. So Athens was pretty popping when my parents were there, and definitely became something that we went to the Georgia games my whole life. So yeah, definitely grew up Georgia fan, grew up going to games, played high school football, did that whole deal. And really, I always want to be a GM. I always wanted to be a GM. When I played Madden a lot growing up, I really enjoyed the franchise mode. That was kind of what I liked more so than actual playing the game. I like the rosters. I like the development. I like the pieces that go into it, the mismatches, and all right, we got this. What are we missing? That whole deal. So yeah, coaching and that whole thing never was that interesting to me in terms of a football career, but being a GM, evaluation, kind of everything that goes into scouting, the roster management, construction, that was definitely from an early age. When I decided I wanted to work in football, that was always the direction I wanted to go.
Yeah, I think that's why we all kind of get in the team building aspect. And I think sometimes me and you talk off the phone all the time, off the record. From a team building aspect, I just feel like sometimes the colleges could do a better finding out about the kid and what makes him tick. I think that's a little bit lost in college football. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I think it's a unique industry because it's basically you get things used against you if you aren't doing so. Basically, all right, in-state school doesn't offer, but out-of-state school does offer. That may be used against you, but the rules aren't the same, right? When you're in-state, you got to slow play a little bit because there's relationships and so much of football is like they did it, so you have to do it. And I think that's kind of sped up the timeline for a lot of people. It's kind of changed things now with NIL and transfer portal. You don't want to make anybody mad or upset because they can get in and out real quick. They may have a better deal over here. Like, hey, what are we going to do over here? So I think, it's definitely changed so much that it's hard to do your due diligence on the front end because you're just trying to get your hat in the ring just to compete in the first place. But I do think, programs that have an identity and know what they're doing and how they're doing, and no matter what everybody else is doing, we do our deal. I think those programs, have the ability to kind of, carve out a niche and be different. And I think that's what we did at UW really well. When everybody was offering, 400, 300, 400, 500 people, we prided ourselves on offering 75.
Murph, pause you real fast. I bet you could guess top 2-3 teams that you'd always see on an offer report, like weekly. It would be Kansas before I worked there. Kansas, Michigan, and Tennessee.
Tennessee was the one. Yeah,
Tennessee under Butch Jones. I mean,
brick by brick,
if you walked on campus, you may be holding a verbal offer.
Hey, buddy, you like football? No,
can you tie your cleats, son?
Right. So it was but again, like in that era, like it's such a you want to throw your hat in the ring. You don't want to make a kid upset. You want to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to, and that is an approach. It's not an approach that like I would personally do as a recruiting department, because I do think you lose some of the personal touch, and I think when you have so many kids you're recruiting, it's hard to kind of as a staff kind of swarm around them and recruit them, as a one big tandem. When you got 400, 500, 300, even, 250, 300, it's a lot of kids versus 112, 115, 120, whatever it is. Right. So I think there is that blend, because in the NIL portal era, to be so selective, like if you miss on some guys, that can really end up hurting you, and you may not have, the quality guys behind it to do something about it. So I do think, part of the reason that it is hard to do your due diligence, and it is hard, is because of the timeline that's been created. But if you can have a staff that you trust and you'll have a good relationship with your coaching staff, I think certainly there is a blend where you can slow it down and have a little bit more of a slow play to get to know who you're recruiting. Because I do think also within the portal, era, if you do the front end stuff right, it makes the back end stuff a lot easier, right? If the kids you bring in, the families feel comfortable, if they know the deal, I think when you get, money and playing time and blah, 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 when you're pushing that, as part of the selling point, that can change real quick. But if you're selling your school, your continuity, your staff, your future, your past, even who you put in the league, your all, or what you've done positionally, yardage wise, blah, blah, blah. Right. If that's part of the main selling point, and families understand what they're buying into and it's whatever, you can make it work. But when it's, a lot of kind of the bells and whistles up front, I do think you see, on the back end, maybe some more musical chairs than maybe, you used to see.
Absolutely. All right. Well, kind of told the fans beforehand, and before we get to it, just a quick update, guys. So we talked about the NBA draft a little bit. The next SEC player was off. Anthony Black did go at number 6 to the Magic. So they got themselves a big guard. LSU and Wake Forest still not at 0-0, I believe, going to the 8th. Winner will go face Florida in the College World Series. But Murph, so me and Josh got on the phone yesterday, got on the horn, tested this out. So I don't think we weren't prepared coming in with the technological stuff. It happens. So we were prepared. We got our 3 guys that we picked out. Again, Josh, what did we say? We didn't really want to go further than 2014 or 15, really keep it kind of in the modern era when we were around. So we had some connections to these recruitments, and these are some guys you see playing on Sunday now. So I'm going to share my screen here. We're going to start watching. We're going to lead off. I'm just going to spoil it for you. Jonah Williams here. And the 3 guys we'll watch will be Jonah Williams, who everybody remembers from California, Folsom High School, offensive tackle, ended up going to Alabama. Next, we'd have Derek Brown, defensive tackle from Lanier High School in Beaufort. I mean, he ended up going to Auburn. I mean, just one of the – Josh, I mean, I quoted you earlier a little bit for you on air, but again, I'm with you. One of my favorite films of all time. We'll get to that in just a minute. And then finally, Roquan Smith, linebacker from Montezuma, Georgia, Macon County. Kind of got the Georgia thing started at linebacker. These are Butkus Award winners that Glenn Schumann's kind of produced really since Monty Rice, Channing Tindall, guys like that, N'Kobe Dean, kind of got it started. It's kind of the Dante Hightower of Georgia, or Rolando McClain from Georgia. But let me share the screen real fast. We're going to start off with Jonah Williams, walk you through some of that film a little bit. Just kind of talk about his recruitment, because me and Josh were both at Georgia at the same time this was going on.
Yeah, no, I think, and kind of to expand while you're pulling it up, I think,
Good, Murph, can you see this?
Oh, yeah, I'm in. I can see it great. That's great. Hey, that's a good pick. I think, like you said, within this, we have experience with these guys, and we have experience obviously in this industry. So it is kind of cool to contextually, go back down memory road and, oh my God, and see, what made some of these guys the freak athletes and the first round picks that they were.
Yeah. And Murph, I'll be like, last night after me and you talked, went back and watched the high school film, some of the college stuff, and some of their NFL stuff. These 3 guys, Jonah Williams really does. I feel like he is strong. He's got natural strength. But the thing that always was just fun to watch with him is you could tell, especially for offensive line, he's a real smart guy, real high football intelligence guy. He knows how to play with leverage. His hand placement, I think, for a high school kid was unbelievable. His twitch. I feel like he wasn't really just a mauler or an overly nasty guy, but I feel like he understood how to play the position. Like on their outside zones and stuff. I saw someone was talking about it with the Bengals. It was like he was very smart and knew just how to wash down. Like if he couldn't cut off a guy, he was just like, you know what, I'm going to let this guy play his leverage against him. Like, I think he doesn't like try to overly just dominate. Kind of a finesse offensive lineman. Murph, what's some specific things you remember just from this tape or his recruitment? Because remember, it came down to, just from looking it up, everybody knows he went to Alabama. If I remember right, the final 3, he wanted to go to school in the SEC. It was between Georgia, which I would say was us at the time, but then Alabama, and then I believe Auburn was his 3rd school. Did I remember that correctly?
I know the SEC swing. I know that there was some familial element of being in the Southeast at one point. Parents were from Atlanta or something. I remember he used to work out under a Georgia flag, maybe in his home gym. There was something that there was a Georgia flag. There was an East Coast connection. There's a Southeast connection. And I think just at the time too, obviously the SEC's kind of had its stranglehold on college football for a while at this point, but just where, maybe Georgia was trending, I forget where maybe Florida was at that time, Alabama, LSU, obviously, A&M. I don't know if that's the Johnny Manziel era around that time, Kevin Sumlin. So,
this was kind of that time, if I remember right. I don't really mention names of the guys on our staff that were there because we'll get into that in a minute. But Mark Rick was at Georgia, and Brian Schottenheimer was the OC, just kind of painting the picture for the people listening. For Kirby, offensive line coach, I think the guys that recruited him were, I believe it was Mario Cristobal and Taj Lapoy probably was the area coach, I'd assume, over there back then at Alabama. Then Auburn had, what's his name, J.B. Grimes, I think was the offensive line coach back then for Gus Malzahn. So that's I think that was kind of the stage of the staff then.
Was Georgia Rob Sale at the time? Or was it Will Friend?
Georgia was Rob Sale. It was Rob Sale at the time. Brian Schottenheimer and Rob Sale were the 2. At Georgia, we didn't really have any area recruiters out there in California on that staff.
No, not at all. And but that's even a good point too, right? Like I think so much of what I think the emphasis on us even watching this tape and going back through some of these guys who were studs and went on to be dudes, right? Is we're trying to peel back the curtain into this whole process as a whole. And I think even like you said, area recruiting and how this whole thing even shakes out and how, a guy from California ends up in the SEC. And in this particular case, it was a, kind of a familial background. There was something there, but it was for a long period of time. It's rare for guys to go, from Georgia, Alabama, Florida, whatever, and go out to California and pull those guys from, Antioch or Folsom or any of these, big time schools, modern day, right? So I think you've seen over the last couple of years, obviously with social media and huddle and everything kind of expand, how recruiting works and really, obviously the television rights, kids in Folsom can see every Alabama game every single Saturday or see every Georgia game every single Saturday. And that maybe is different from when we were kids, So I think, when we got into recruiting, it was kind of the changeover from DVDs. It was the move from DVDs to huddle. It was the boom of Twitter. Coaches are getting on Twitter. Facebook is kind of getting phased out in terms of how recruiting goes. So I think
photo shoots were just jerseys.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I still have I saw my picture of my first photo shoot I ever where I laid out the jersey and I was making it all nice. I found it the other day from 2014. I was like, man, things have changed in the last 9 years, huh?
No, and then this was at the time when the SEC was dominating. I think that one of these years, Ohio State, Oregon in the national championship, I think sandwich between that. But besides that, I think it was the first time in years since the 06, I think from 06 to 13, an SEC team played a national championship from then. I think the start of the Florida League, Tebow to all the way with like Gus and Auburn played Florida State and Jimbo with them. I think it was that long. So the SEC was kind of like in your face as a college football, like as a recruit at that point. Like it was almost getting that NFL logo if an SEC as a staffer. Like, if you're a personnel guy or a coach and you go work in the NFL, it stays for you a while. I think these guys kind of thought of these prospects from a recruiting standpoint. But Murph, it was like the biggest story. We were kind of talking about it last night that reminded me of this kid was when he came for a spring practice, I believe. And he was kind of turned off by, I don't think he wanted the in-your-face. And Murph, Josh, you correct me if I'm wrong. Offensive line coaches are very interesting people to me. Always been. I think they're one of the smarter coaches out of the 10 full-times, in my opinion. Very intelligent. But they all have their little quirks or certain things they look for in players. And they talk to their offensive linemen, but it's a little bit like they're on their ass. Like it's a little bit of like, you wouldn't want your mother or sister around a little bit. So I remember this kid being taken around by one of our recruiting staffers to his offensive line individual position unit. And we mentioned, you said it earlier, but the offensive line coach at the time, I think was using some foul language, cursing like a sailor a little bit. I think that turned that kid off a little bit. I don't know why, because Mario Cristobal is kind of a little bit like that too. Brent Key, I've never been around Brent Key, but I think he was one of the guys on the offensive line as well. But again, I remember that he wasn't a guy that took to yelling well. I didn't think he really liked that, or a guy that was like a engineer, like a Joe Kynes, if you know what I'm talking about, the former Alabama DC. It's kind of like an engineer operator. You know what I mean? He just wasn't a guy that I think was going to take to, shouldn't say hard coaching, just unnecessary verbal abuse, maybe would be a way to put it.
Well, like the thing that is interesting that I didn't necessarily like, leaving the Southeast and going to work in the Pac-12, you just it's a different style of kid. It's a different style of personality. And in the Southeast, the culture of football and the culture of what, you still got small towns that shut down on Friday nights. Like it is still very much ingrained within the Southeastern culture. And I think there's a certain disposition that has just been a part of the football culture for a long time. And I don't think that necessarily that is the culture on the West Coast. I don't think that's what it is, So, obviously some kids may respond better to it and people may be more, more prone to that type of coaching. But really, I think, from a cultural shift, from a tonal shift, I can see in that moment, if you're going on a tour and you're kind of just checking things out and that's your first impression, it's like, oh my goodness, this is going to be my guy for the next 4 or 5 years. I get if and I think really more than anything, I think he probably loved Alabama more so than that one, any single incident changing, anything too much. But I do think if you're coming over from the West Coast and you're not used to that type of coaching, and you're not used to that style of I'm going to get after you, I'm going to get in your ass type thing, I think that it can be a little shell shocking, a little shell shock if you're not prepared for that, and if you don't have that relationship kind of pre-established. I think, and that's to your point too. Like we didn't recruit California at that time. We didn't really recruit outside of the Southeast. Like it was a big deal when we went into Langham, Texas, and got Tennille Carter, right? Like, oh, we got Tennille Carter from Langham. So like we weren't really going west. We weren't really certainly not going to California. Like I remember it was a deal when we got a guy from California. It was like the first guy since 1980. It was something a long period of time. And it was like a story that people needed to tell. So I do think, certainly within just the recruiting landscape, I think more than anything, it was the culture shock, the singular incident. And I think as he went on with the rest of his recruiting trip, things kind of settled down. And at that time, Alabama was Bama. And it was kind of hard for anybody.
And he always kind of handled it around the building. Remember Murph, the 2 times he always handled himself like a pro, I guess you would say, from a high school standpoint, as much as a pro as you could be at that age.
Was Troy Taylor his high school coach?
He may have been. I don't know who the full head coach was at that time. But I do remember we thought we had a great shot, because you are right. I do remember the whole story of him working out under a Georgia flag, and I had family in the Atlanta area. I think that the Southeast you knew he was going to the SEC. I don't think USC and them in Oregon at the time really even knew. I think it was for sure. But again, though, he was just kind of a classic fit at Alabama. I think he came in immediately and just kind of fit that culture.
He's incredible. just watching this, I think I must have been watching his junior tape earlier. But like you said, I think so. Well, one, Folsom in California, for years kind of, they were slinging it around. They're putting up crazy numbers. They were winning. I think Jake Browning went, it's just like crazy history from Folsom. So, it's going to be good dudes coming out. It's going to be, well coached, well refined. And like you said, one of the biggest differences on the Southeast and the West Coast are the big bodies, right? Like the Southeast has big bodies. You got an abundance of big bodies in the Southeast. That's why you play the style of ball historically that you play, right? The West Coast, you don't have those big bodies. You don't have the movers in volume and depth, right? The way we do in the Southeast. So you play a different style of ball historically. So I think, seeing him play, he was really well coached. He wasn't out there just leaning on dudes because he could. He wasn't just, I'm bigger than you, I'm going to be bigger than everybody, and I'm just going to rely on that. He's smooth and he's powerful, and he'll gore you, and he bends well, and he gets up in space well. And like you said, he's smart. I remember he was like a smart dude. So
more a little bit. And I don't say finesse like he's soft. It was just like he had a physical side and had strong hands, and thought his hand placement was awesome for a kid that young. Like you said, you could tell he knew how to use kids' leverage against them. I can't remember if he had a wrestling background or not, but it's almost like he did. Like you kind of thought like that. And Murph, I was going to ask you, we talked about offensive line coaches being a little bit, they all have their certain things they look for. Some guy some of those guys bend. If he can't bend, get him off. Like if he doesn't have any initial twitch, get him off. If he can't get his second foot in the ground, get him off. For you as an evaluator, what is the initial non-negotiable at that position for an offensive lineman from a high school standpoint? I think
the flexibility and the bend, right? Like I think so much stems from your ability to get in a stance and fire out and move and play with consistent and good leverage and be able to use that technique. If you have trouble getting out of your stance, pretty much the rest of the play is going to be subject to whatever. It's hard to do any. The one thing that coaches will always say is you can't coach stiff, right? And waist bender is a term that's been thrown around offensive line forever, and that really is just when your players basically they make an L with their body, right? They don't have the ability to sink their, and this is obviously not for you, this is for anybody watching. You make an L, right? And you don't have the ability to drop your weight and then explode back out of it, simultaneously. So, for me, I think, and it's such you can see it immediately. You can see if somebody's a waist bender. And that's part of the thing with high school recruiting is that you may have a dude who's a mauler. He may be 6'5", 300, but the dude can't get in a stance. And
go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, I'm just saying
And so much, like you have these big fat, like there's so, like the defensive linemen now, and you look at the NFL draft, the defensive linemen are like the biggest freaks out there. They're the biggest freaks out there.
Hell, we're about to move to a freak.
Oh, I love them. Yeah, Derek Brown's great, and they're the biggest freaks out there. And you have offensive linemen that are having to be, technically sound, technically proficient, and who really have not gotten there yet, at least not universally, to match the athleticism and to match what the defensive line is doing, right? Like you see the guys in the NFL draft that are really like turning heads and doing crazy numbers, outside linebackers, D-line. The O-line hasn't really shifted to the O-line yet, right? Like there's not that counterpart of athleticism to combat that in the same kind of swing. So like, for me, if you see a dude immediately who can't get into a stance, then he's not going to be able to fire out. He won't be able to redirect. He won't be able to explode. Everything comes from that. And then again, if he's a waist bender, he's not flexible in his hips. He's probably not going to be flexible in his ankles either. He's probably not going to be and that's going to get into, start to play a little role, with the rest of the film,
And to be fair, I do think the offensive line coach, to be fair to me, I think this is one of the hardest positions to evaluate overall. And like, I mean, you're recruiting 4 or 5 guys a class. Throw in the transfer portal now. You're throwing in some of those guys who have more experience. You kind of know what you're getting. But back in the day when we're talking about the 2016 class with Jonah Williams, it's tough to hit on all 4 or 5 guys. And I think that's where Auburn's issue's been. I know we're talking about another team, but going back even when Gus Malzahn was there, they never consistently hit on offensive linemen. And it trickled down, to be fair to Brian Harsin and his staff a little bit. And I think that's why Hugh Freeze and them, it's not why I think, I know, they went and got a bunch of transfer portal guys from all over the place just to kind of be stopgap players. I think just to get them through this year because their offensive line was so bad. And as you know, man, you miss on enough of those guys and you don't have some kind of prototype that you're looking for and you're changing offensive line coaches all the time. Like we keep saying, offensive line coaches all have different types. The head coach, OC have to set that standard of what are we looking for, the linear type builds that we think, hey, we'll go put some mass on them in 2 years. Once, kind of like Iowa does. They'll go take some projects, but they have the history of putting guys like that in the league. But they'll go take some guys. They know going in it's going to be a 2 or 3 year project. Or you kind of go the A&M route right now, which I'm not really for. They just went and took big bodies. They got 5 starters back this year. Not a lot of athleticism on that offensive line. So it's the head coach has to set that standard so you limit your misses there. Because like, as you know, you start missing enough on there on the offensive line, you're going to be on the struggle bus real fast.
I will say, and I'm sure people disagree with me, but well, one, let me ask you and then make a statement. If you're a head coach, what position coach are you hiring first?
I feel like you said position coach. I'll answer this. I feel like I would still say this, but
in the conference, I would say probably matters a little bit. Maybe I don't know. Maybe
I was going to say overall staff hire. I would hire a strength coach first.
Sure,
but I know what you're talking about. Position coach. I mean, it's going to have to be an offensive line coach I trust. I don't know if I was a head coach, go hire an OC that needs his own O-line. Now, we talk about it. We know him. That'll be fine. But again, you're right. I think you got to start in the trenches a little bit. You need a Rodney Garner. You need I think who's a great offensive line guy. I think Will Friend's a solid technician. I mean, Stacey Searles you got out there, I think is a good offensive line coach. You need guys. You need it. Mario Cristobal was a good position coach. I think you got to start. Now, if I'm taking out coordinators a little bit when we say that, you know what I mean? I'm talking about the true position coaches that deals with one unit. I'm assuming that's kind of you're questioning that too. So I'm not just going to say my quarterback's coach OC. Like, I would go offensive line coach. I would go one of the trenches, but I would lean offensive line coach probably over defensive line coach because, again, I don't know what scheme we're running defensively. And, again, scheme matters on offense, but I feel like those are the tone setters on that offense. Like, you got to be physical and nasty up front. But I think you also got to know what type of offensive line are we looking for. If we're changing it up every year or every 2 or 3 years, we're going to have a bunch of misfits,
right?
Like all over my room. I want my guys getting off the bus on game day all looking the same on the offensive line.
Well, and that, but that even gets to a bigger point, right? With the expectation of college football these days and how in and out people are, the continuity, the schemes. It's you may have an entire staff like what we're seeing Georgia Tech go through, recruit guys for one offense, and then overnight we're switching everything. You got to give them some time to get things back on track. You can't have and this is why like context matters. You can't just look at, Georgia Tech the same way you would look at another school because of where they're coming from and what they're trying to do and what the turnover with that has to come. So I agree. And I think, I think Sam Pittman came in and was probably as impactful as a hire as Kirby made the entire time he's been there. Like and this is zero, disrespect to anybody that's been there, but Sam Pittman, I felt like came in and connected the dots in a way for Georgia that hadn't been connected, at least in my lifetime. It was like 1 through 5. Like I remember growing up, like Trent Sturdivant, right? Or Cordy Glenn. Like there were guys, Ben Jones, like there were guys you remembered. But it was the first time that I felt like 1 through 5, maybe 1 through 7 by the
you had
8.
dudes.
Oh, and they were movers too. Like
it wasn't like you said. It wasn't like you said the one-off David Andrews. Now, he obviously
and he was probably not overly recruited. Like these were dudes. And I remember us finding Justin Schaefer and how excited Pittman was because he moved really well and he's big. Or Solomon Kinley. He loved Solomon Kinley because Solomon was a little overweight at the time and need to lose some weight, drop some of the baby fat. But these are dudes that went on to play in the league and are still playing in the league that were really under recruited or whatever. So I think what Sam Pittman did for Georgia, it transformed everything that they were doing. And like you said, offensive line coaches are weird, but like in the best way, right? Like they're the weirdest guys on staff, but like they're the most fun guys on staff. They're the most enjoyable.
They're probably the closest. They're probably the closest unit with their guys.
Yeah, because most of the time they were that guy, right? Like I've always felt like,
in my opinion, that's a position too. You can't go live in the portal, man, for offensive line. Everybody is looking for offensive linemen. Everybody in the country. I mean, they're hard to find, hard to develop. You have to have guys that have been sitting in your program as a next man up. They've been sitting there 1-2 years in the strength and conditioning program. And you're going to have some freaks every now and then that are going to come start as freshmen. But again, this isn't you can't have a bunch of individual contractors, 4 or 5, even 3 to 5 new dudes every year. You just can't. You got to build it up through your system, what they want. I think, you could talk offensive line all day. I feel like just the evaluation process. But I think it all goes back to you got to have a plan. You got to have a prototype. You got to know what we're going into. I mean, I'm reading Jonah Williams' height and weight, and I got his high school height and weight to what he was at the combine. So in high school, he was listed 6'5", 280. At the combine,
beautiful.
6'4", 302 with 33 5/8 arm, and he ran a 5.12 40-yard dash. So, I mean, essentially he added 22, according to his 247 profile coming out of high school. Take that as it is. But the combine, as we all know, it's official numbers, 302.
And that's something too that a big and I talked to a lot of the high school kids that I talked to. There's a misconception. I don't know if it's bigger is better, and that's not always true, right? Like there is something to be said about 270 and room to grow, right? 265 and room to fill out. When you're over 300, you're 310, 330, it's usually, and I don't mean to generalize, usually not great weight, which means
it's easier to put weight on than it is to take off.
Weight. And when we eval guys, it would be assumed that we would sitting there, all right, you guys going to gain 20, 25 pounds in the first year and a half, right? Like that's kind of part of a lot of the eval process, depending on your position, right? So I think that's a big, and Jonah looked great, right? He looked great. Like he was long, he was lean, big, Ben Cleveland when he came through, same deal, big, long, lean, strong. It wasn't sloppy. And I think there's a misconception with some offensive linemen that think, oh, bigger is better. Hey, I'm big, I can move some weight. And it's like, well, you got to be able to do it for 60 minutes. You got to be able to do it against the most athletic person on the field, So I do think like it's a good point about, his weight and his height and his weight. And I think he kind of got docked for maybe shorter arms. Was that his deal?
Yeah, he had shorter arms, 33 5/8 arm is what he had at the combine. You're right. That's not that long.
For a tackle.
sometimes that can be a little. I was just talking about it for you, Join. A lot of these stats, just like returning production, a little bit of an overrated stat sometimes. Like if the guy can block and protect the quarterback, does it really freaking matter how long his arms are at the end of the day? Like it matters, but it does. Like the film's going to tell you if it affects the kid or not.
Right.
And some people have chatted in. They Brett Barat earlier. He asked where Big Worm was. I don't know who Brett Barat is, but he's in. He's listening. Appreciate you listening. Yeah, it sounds like I like the name. Appreciate you listening. Tyler Giles, preach it, Murph. Best position. This is also Tyler. Best position coach hire Kirby made. Change the culture of that program on the offensive line. Thank you for listening, Tyler. That's what we were just talking about. We agree.
Well, and for Tyler, I think the context with that is so Tyler went on to be the DPP at San Jose State. He was a DPP at Fresno State. So he's a guy that we worked with, and that's something too that. We had a really good crew that dispersed all over the country and dispersed all over football. So, guys like Tyler, Trav went to the 49ers, Canals with the Chiefs. Joe was up with Michigan. Debo's out at A&M. I know I'm missing some few. Drew Hickson was at South Carolina. So we were all part at Georgia as part of this kind of, big movement when everything kind of happened at the same time.
We talked about Adam Ray was back there.
Adam Ray, I talked to him last week.
He's a special teams analyst at Georgia.
Yeah, he's still there. Going on a decade inside Rome while it got built, which is pretty cool.
You talk about guy should write a book. Should write a book. All right, Murph, we're moving on. We're switching sides of the ball here. Let me share my screen again. We're moving to I'm with Murph. When people ask your best film I've ever seen. Murph, can you see her?
Oh, I can see her. I can see her.
Derek Brown here. And sorry, I should have said Julian Williams' height and weight before, but Derek Brown, again, another 2016 class kid, defensive tackle. Me and Murphy are probably one of the more dominant high school films. You knew this kid was going to be a player. Lanier High School in Beaufort, Georgia. At a high school listed 6'3" 3/4", 317. Was a first-round draft pick, seventh overall. At the combine, he measured in at 6'5", 326 with 34 1/4 arms and 9-inch hands. So 6'5", 326. Derek Brown, man, I think I have a little bit of an interesting take. I remember his recruitment at Georgia, and then also I left right after he signed with Georgia to go to Auburn. So I was there with him his freshman year at Auburn from really his recruitment for 2 years to his freshman year. But Derek Brown, maybe he lived at the Butts-Mehre facility in Athens. Didn't he remember? I really think if Mark Richt, the Georgia fans wouldn't trade this, let's be honest. If Mark Richt didn't leave, I think Derek Brown signs with Georgia. I'm on quote right now. I think a lot of people that were in the building at the time feels the same way. I know Tracy Rocker was retained, but I think Mark Richt had a big thing. If Mark Richt is never fired, Derek Brown comes to Georgia, probably has a great year, a great career, just like he did at Auburn. But I don't think Georgia fans would take that trade. I think they're fine with their national championships and not having Derek Brown. But again, this was a kid that was always around the facility, Murph. I mean, what's some of the things you remember from Derek?
Well, so a lot of people don't know kind of how this whole thing works. So, part of that crew of guys that has talked about, the ones that went all over the country, we're all split into areas, and we have certain designation areas that we're trying to find guys, recruit guys, cut them up, get the film in front of our coaches. So I was lucky enough to have a really huge area and work for a really cool coach in Del McGee. Coach McGee had a really prime real estate in Atlanta.
You guys listen out there, Dale McGee, I know most people listen know who he is, but he's Georgia's running backs coach, was one of Kirby's first. He's been on the staff since 2016 as well.
Yeah. Sorry. I was kind of Dell's assistant, however you want to call it. So I basically lived in the back of his office. So it was my job, prior to him getting there before, regardless, it was my job to cut film in that area. And Lanier, was in my area, and it was a weekly deal where I enjoyed watching Derek Brown's tape so much because he did things that 300 pounders don't do. Mm-hmm. He moved incredibly well. He got off the line with such quickness, his lateral agility. You saw him catch a touchdown pass earlier, and he was a good kid. He was quiet, if I remember that correctly, like a relatively quiet dude, pretty humble, but it's a guy that to this day, him, Najee Harris, Cam Akers, there was a few of them that weekly I'm like, man, what are we going to do this week? Because it's not even fair to whoever's playing them. And Derek Brown every week. I mean, it's just like stuff. And the thing is, like,
Murph, you correct me if I'm wrong on this. You correct me. I've always put it this way. And I'm going to let you take this over for a minute so you can explain this. He's talking about that back room. They called it the dog pound that we were in. You did eval / cut up tape / profile tape. Different programs call them whatever they are. They're the same thing. Again, profile tapes, cut up tapes, eval tapes, whatever you want to call them. It's the good, it's the bad, it's the ugly. It's really looking for like functional movement skills kind of deal. Tell Murph if I'm forgetting something. It's showing some loaf plays. And what I mean by loaf, if a player takes some plays off. Derek Brown's one of the few kids I can ever remember. The eval tape, profile tape, whatever you want to call it, was as good as the highlight tape.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, you go back and you flash and you watch this and you go back and watch some of the kid Derek Brown's college tape. I mean, there's one of those plays. I think they were in the swamp in 2019. He picked up a ball on a fumble and took off and almost had another burst. You talking about his athleticism. There was a play at Ole Miss. They're playing Ole Miss in 2019. I think he's running on the field late. And Ole Miss throws a screen to Auburn sideline. He's running on, and just the explosion that he tackles this receiver like a quick now screen because they subbed late. I mean, it was a lucky busted play, but just the explosion of him coming out of his hips, tackling this kid in the open field was just unbelievable. And some of the plays in the Iron Bowl year, that 2019 year, Derek Brown was one of the more very Nick Fairley-ish. And I'm not saying that it's an Auburn player, but it was very like, every now and then you have a defensive lineman that kind of takes over the league, and he did that year. 2019, it's very impressive. One of the few kids with a cut up profile tape. Looked very similar to highlight tape. And Murph, you've watched a ton of film. That doesn't happen often.
No, if I remember correctly, I think I showed his, because it was a thing where, like you're saying, everybody has a kind of a different approach. Some coaches say, "Hey, show me the highlights. Let me see what I'm working with first. If I don't like the highlights, I'm not going to like the lowlights." Right? That's some of that's an approach. Some people say, "I don't want to see the highlights. Let me see the raw, unfiltered. Let me see who he is. I don't want to see the other one first. It may taint my."
I think some of these fans that listen and some of these fans that are soon to be listeners would be baffled at how their program, maybe not their program, but their rival program, only watch highlight tapes. It's baffling to me. We're not going to name names, but again, Josh, Alabama, Georgia, the film organization library back there was unbelievable. We had a great system going down. We had critical factors we wanted at each position. I personally think it drives me nuts if you're going to sign a kid and you've never watched full games of the kid. That would drive me nuts. That would literally be like dating a girl just on her profile picture on Facebook or Instagram. Just a profile picture.
Yeah. Well, to me, it's just you're playing with fire, right? And there's a guy that I remembered. I was cutting him up, and he was from. It wasn't Josh Sweat, but it was the Josh Sweat era ish. And I believe he's a dude from like Maryland, Virginia, and as pretty as could be, right? Long, lean, fast, quick twitch. But when you watched him, independent of the highlights, you saw him between plays, certain quarters, you saw him. Just the effort dropped off completely. The intensity disappeared, and it completely changes the evaluation because like he has it within him. I know he has the ability to do it, but will he do it for the whole game? And when you remove the cut up element from the highlight tape or from the evaluation process, it's like you take out so much of the context of what you're seeing. And there is an element of, and I think the way the coaches look at it is like, let me see what he can do. And I trust myself and I trust his environment enough that we're going to get the most out of him every single play. And I get that. But at the same time, as we all know, it's hard to change people, right? People don't really change unless they want to. So if the guy wants to walk between plays and he thinks that's cool, it doesn't really, like, no amount of yelling is really going to change that if that's not who he is, So, to me, it's the cut up and the highlight can be such a distinctive difference between, hey, what are we really getting, or what is the upside of the player that we're recruiting? And it's kind of a different conversation.
And if you're a fan sitting out there and you may be asking, I don't know, you may not, but I think I would ask this question if I didn't know. What happens if you see some loafs or you don't like what you see on the Good Ugly? Like what happens in these college programs when the position coach, coordinator, head coach end up watching this and they don't like what they're seeing? Well, I do remember specifically, Murph, you remember the outside linebacker for Auburn this past year, Derek Hall?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. So at Auburn, he was loafing a lot his senior year. They had to call him down. He was at Gulfport High School down on the coast of Mississippi. They had to call him and be like, hey, man, look, this isn't flying. We're not going to sign them. You're loafing. You're just standing up once the ball snapped. Kid flipped a switch. Second half of his senior season was awesome. Look at kid. Went on. He got drafted. Forget who drafted him this past draft, but he got drafted. I think in the top 4 rounds. Had a great year. That stuff can happen. But if it doesn't change and you talk to the high school coach from that perspective, that's how some kids can get dropped. If you're paying attention to your team, some late minute ads, maybe they're getting somebody that they weren't expected late. But that's at least how it used to be. Like before the whole portal thing, it used to kind of, you communicate to the high school coach, the kid saying, hey, we needed to kind of step this up. So we weren't just watching these eval tapes and doing nothing with it. There was stuff it would go through the proper channels. Maybe the area coach, position coach would go have that call with the kid and his high school coach.
And yeah, for sure. And I think that's such a big part of this process. And you know, if the kid is responsive, then great, right? That's the thing that, like, you don't need to be perfect. Nobody, like, you're 15 years old, you're 16 years old. I think this emphasis on being ready-made, finished products is kind of blown out of proportion. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be moldable, and you need to be able to hear constructive criticism and understand that really what people are telling you is in your best interest most of the time. Not everybody, but if they're giving you some kind of constructive feedback, like, hey man, you're starting to, low effort, or not really running through the play or whatever it is, it's not an attempt to knock the kid to knock them. It's like, hey, you're better than this. Let's get more. So I think, like to your point earlier, you don't want to see too much of it to be a consistent pattern, right? It's fine to loaf at times, right? It's a long game. You get tired. You look at the NFL. There will be times where our favorite players may take a play or two off every now and then. It happens. The problem is when it becomes definitive of who you are as a player. And if when addressed, you have a negative reaction, you don't like it, you disagree, you're defiant, that's where things start to kind of change. Like, all right, it's one thing to do it and then correct it. It's one thing to do it and then argue against it. And that is a completely different, evaluation within itself,
Yeah. So, yeah.
And to your other point about Derek Brown, he is one of the few tapes I've ever watched with a coach where it was stopped halfway through and he asked, no, I want to see the cut up. And I'm like, no, that is the cut up, So incredible player.
And I give a lot of credit from that standpoint for the development of Derek to Rodney Garner. I mean, I remember sitting there at practice. I always, for whatever reason, when I was at practice, I liked going to watch the defensive lineman. I just kind of like the technician part of it, the technical side of it. But the thing I liked the most, honestly, is Derek Brown sit there and listen. Rodney Garner, if you know him at all, he is ripping the freshman a new one. When I was there, Carl Lawson and Montravius Adams were the seniors. They used to get it back in 2013. So they were kind of there as the big brothers for Derek, especially Montravius. And I remember Derek used to just maybe go down with the wrong hand, had his left foot down with his right foot. You know what I mean? It's just like Rodney Garner would go nuts on him. Or he would do it correctly, and Rodney would just get on him, or Coach Gardner would get on him just to see how he'd react. And Derek would turn around and look. I remember he looked at me like, what do I do? He's kind of a deer in the headlights. Dude, once that guy took off that second year, man, one of the more dominant defensive linemen in the SEC's history that I don't think's talked about enough. That 2019 year was unbelievable of his. But again, I'm with you. Probably the best defensive film up there with like the Minka Fitzpatrick's. Reuben Foster's film was pretty good. Guys like that, like in the past at least 10, 15 years. I don't know. Reuben, I think Minka was in the same class as Derek, but Reuben was a little older, like 2013 class, I think. But no, Murph. So moving on to our last guy. Appreciate everybody joining us. We're an hour and a half in. Remember, Thursdays, we're going to start this scout school. Josh is going to be joining us through July for this scout school. I hope you enjoy it. Remember, give us some feedback from stuff you'd like to see us add. We got one more guy, but before we do, just give you a little update. So we got bottom of the ninth. LSU's batting. We're still 0-0. Skeens and Louder just pitching gems. One out. Remember, winner heads to the College World Series Championship Series to face Florida. Bottom of the ninth, LSU's the home team. If they score here, the game will be over. And then from an SEC standpoint, from an NBA draft standpoint, Cason Wallace from Kentucky got picked at 10th by the Oklahoma City Thunder. So that's where the draft stands right now. Let me share my screen here for our last guy heading into the night.
Any surprises from the draft or anything? Any weird trades or anything?
It didn't really look like it. So I guess the biggest thing was Brandon Miller going to Charlotte over Scoot. Yeah. Hey, Charlotte's an Alabama town now, Murph. You got Bryce Young and you got Brandon Miller. All right, so Roquan Smith, one of my favorite stories. Murph, you were there as well. Roquan Smith, a 2015 signee. He was a freshman in Mark Ricks last year, coming out of high school from Macon County down in Montezuma, real country town down there. Listed in high school 6'2", 207. What I liked about him, he played both ways. I always like that out of linebackers. You'll see his running back highlights here in just a minute towards the end. This is him playing linebacker, just an explosive athlete. Now at the combine, as you remember though, he was listed 6'1", 230. Not listed, he was measured 6'1", 236 at the combine. 32-inch arms, 10-inch hand, ran a 4.5 140. Was ultimately selected first round, 8th overall pick by the Chicago Bears. But Roquan Smith, kind of the dean of that Georgia inside linebacker room, where he was the first one to really get Glenn Schumann's Hall of Fame for that inside linebacker room rolling. I mean, after him, who do we say? Murph, Monty Rice, Channing Tindall, and Kobe Dean, but really Roquan Smith was the first one. Yeah, was really the first one that kind of got it rolling. What's some stuff you remember about Roquan? Obviously, you remember the signing day fiasco, but other than that, just from his film standpoint, what was some other stuff you remember, Murph?
Oh my gosh, look at that play. The thing that always
the offense, find out why.
It's incredible. And the thing that I think that people I meant to say this earlier. Part of the benefit of watching this style of tape and this type of tape is basically they become your benchmarks, right? So I have hundreds of players that are my benchmark players. Are like, hey, what does elite look like? What does the best of the best look like? So then if this is this, everything falls under this line. And I think Roquan, and my memory is not great, but when it comes to this stuff, I think Roquan was coming at a time where we were transitioning away from the big thumpers, maybe the Dante Hightowers, the bigger dudes, and we were starting to get
these it was because of the up tempo offenses.
Right.
Remember at the time they were changing the rule where you couldn't substitute. So it was really Gus in the hurry up no huddle at Auburn. Remember, they would get your 11 guys on the field and they would substitute and go as fast as possible. So you keep your base formation out there forever. So like you said, he struggled a little bit his freshman year because he was light. But at the end of the day, he started getting in the program. Glenn Schumann comes around, great inside linebacker coach. Kirby, they develop him into the Butkus Award winner. I mean, this is great clay to mold right here.
Oh, it's incredible. And just this is like, if you can go back and watch what elite looks like, and it can be even offensively, he looks elite. And this is an all-pro, defense, linebacker, right? Defensive player, middle linebacker, who's playing receiver looking like he could play in the SEC or playing running back or whatever he's doing with the ball in his hands. He's a threat. So I think it was his explosiveness, his fluidity.
That's the first word that comes to mind to me, Murph. If you ask me one word to explain Roquan Smith, explosiveness is the initial word that comes to mind.
There is I have an image, or I have a clip, I guess, that plays in my mind. It's Coach Schumann at one of our summer camps, and he got Roquan to demonstrate the bag drills. So Roquan's a camp counselor. He's there and he's there to, instruct the kids, give back, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, hey, Roquan, get up there and run through the bags and show the kids how it's done. And the explosiveness, the fluidity, the ease in which he could go down the bags and get out and run, to this day stands out. And when you saw him do it and then see kids a year or two behind him, like he's 19, 20, and you got 17, 16-year-old kids doing it, like not that difference, or not that big age difference, but to see the difference at the same camp in front of the same coaches of what elite looks like and like pretty good was like, oh my gosh, like you don't know until you see those two things side by side. And it's translated to the league. Like, and that's the cool thing about every one of these guys. You can see it in high school. Jonah Williams was clean and long and svelte and looked good and refined. Like, he was not sloppy. He didn't have to go through this big transformation process. It wasn't a huge learning curve. He looked ready to roll. Derek Brown looked ready to roll. Roquan looked ready to roll. It's just putting him in the right environment and then having that kind of,
and then letting his body develop, get some strength, add some mass. You're right. Like, that first year he played special teams, but he didn't start that for, like you said. But again, I mean, neither did Derek. There's a learning curve for all that. Derek Brown didn't play a lot his first year. He really didn't. He didn't play a lot his first year. Really, like you said, I'd probably say from ready-made from start to finish would probably have been Jonah and then Derek Brown. And then I would say probably Roquan would have been the third guy. But Roquan, you could argue, had the highest ceiling at some point, just from an explode. I mean, he's just an explode. I mean, I remember this film, but they're running tunnel screens to get him in space on offense.
I didn't remember that. I remembered, the turn and run and the hustle and the speed. Like, I remember seeing all that, and it was kind of that, like, you were tired today, kind of that Alec Ogletree a little bit, where it's like, safety coming down, kind of body type, a little bit lighter, explosive type guy. But I didn't remember the offensive side of stuff like this. And I mean, I'll tell you, I do, you touched on it. I remember the commitment. I remember the confusion. I remember Trent Thompson. I know where I was sitting, the gloves, the UCLA. Like, I remember all of that stuff with Roquan. And that's something that, when you look back, and, it's been I don't even know how many, a decade or whatever it's been, Roquan, he committed to LSU, did he not? Or sorry, UCLA, right?
UCLA on signing day. He put the gloves on, because you remember what he wanted to be if football didn't work out.
I don't remember.
So that's why he was going to. I mean, not Hollywood, Pasadena, but Hollywood's nearby. Obviously, if you're familiar with the United States map. But yeah, he wanted to be an actor. So that's why he picked UCLA, and he was close to the linebackers coach. And I remember last minute that guy left to go take a job with the Falcons, I think.
Yeah,
which put us. Who was our inside linebackers coach? In Eckler?
Yes.
Yeah, it was Mike Eckler, who is now the inside linebackers coach, special teams coordinator for Tennessee. So it was Eckler then, and I remember Pruitt saying he went down for the in-home visit, and they're wondering where Roquan was, and he saw him come out, and he was chasing squirrels, trying to catch them with his bare hand to cook for dinner.
That's
I think I've never been. I've driven through Montezuma, Georgia, but I haven't ever had the pleasure of dining there. So it'd be interesting. But again, I think guys like Rusty Mansell, I think Jeremy Pruitt have said that story. Like, yeah, I've driven up in his driveway before, and it's not surprising to see him running in the front yard trying to catch squirrels with his bare hands.
Isn't that a crazy kind of like twist of fate, really, though? It was Dan Quinn, was it not? Wasn't it Dan Quinn getting hired for the Falcons? So
I think it was.
So you have Florida's DC, or was he in the league at that point? He was probably already in the league.
Yeah,
so
I think he had all that, but I do remember UCLA. I think you're right. I think Dan Quinn had a connection with UCLA's linebackers, because who was the UCLA coach? And it was Jim Mora. I think it was Jim Mora.
Okay, and then there's
more. I want to say maybe Jim
somewhere.
Mora then. Yeah, I want to say it was Jim Mora at that time.
Okay,
but yeah, I remember he wanted to go to UCLA, and then Trenton Thompson got in the car, drove down to Montezuma, and they were close. Obviously, two Georgia kids, and I think he kind of talked him into coming to Georgia. Funny how both their careers kind of went opposite ways after that. But I think that was the story. Trenton Thompson, I think, was for sure thinking he was going to commit on TV, and I think Roquan changed last minute. But yeah, he wanted to be an actor if this football thing didn't work out. But I don't know if we're going to be seeing him in any movies anytime soon.
Hey, I've been watching the Arnold documentary. Roquan's just waiting his time. He's going to get the league done, and then he's going to do the acting thing afterwards.
How many episodes are in that, by the way? I'm on the first episode.
3.
Is there 3? It's just a little mini series. I need to get on it. It's been done real well so far.
Now, Arnold, I'm a big Arnold guy I like guys that maximize the timeline. And you got an Austrian bodybuilder turns into the biggest star in Hollywood and the governor of California. It's pretty cool, So he could have just tapped out, doing one thing, and he maximized everything, which is pretty wild. So,
well, Murph, I'm about to finish that documentary by the way. But Murph's going to be, as I mentioned, he's going to be a normal guest for us here through July, our summer scout school. If you want some guys for us to evaluate, kind of keep it in the 13, 14 class range. that we can still go get film and talk about it, talk about the recruitments. Really trying to keep it stout. Guys, at least it went to the SEC since we're an SEC podcast, SEC show. But again, this is going to be something me and Josh had a blast tonight, Murph. I appreciate you joining us, man. But this is going to be something we're going to be doing every Thursday, so keep it on the calendar. I hope you enjoyed this as much as we did. Murph, before we get out of here, going to give you some final, give you the mic here for just a minute, just some closing comments.
Yeah, man. Well, yeah, I appreciate it. I have fun going down memory lane, checking out the tape, and definitely, it's even cool, and I think it's even cool seeing, Tyler Giles, come in. Debo was Brett Barat, by the way.
Yeah, and Debo, I don't know if he works for Russia on the side or something, but he's got his Brett, whoever the heck Brett Barat is over there.
Hey, I don't need to know. But it is cool though, because it is, we worked at Georgia a decade ago, and we got people here from a decade ago chiming in, able to share stories and kind of, again, I think it's pretty cool because we really got to Georgia and really got into recruiting right as things were kind of taking off and blowing up, as the way they are now. So, I'm excited to get on here with you and talk a little ball and talk a little, memory lane. And if anybody wants any recruiting help for their own, trajectory, Recruiting 101, follow me on Josh Murphy CFB on Twitter. I got some packets for you, got some presentations for you. Hit me up. I'd love to talk to you.
Perfect. Well, guys, I appreciate y'all joining us. Just as you're out of here, hey, remember, Ellis, we're in extra innings down in Omaha, so I'm about to get us off here. Go check out that bottom of the 10th here, still 0-0. No other updates from an NBA draft standpoint here. But again, appreciate you joining us for this episode of Mock 10 Sports. Have a great weekend.
Appreciate it.